Welcome back to the Reflection Podcast. I'm Ed Blonsky. Thanks for joining me today. I have a return guest today again. Matt Popovits is with me because Matt has a new book coming out, Junk Drawer Jesus. And we're going to talk about his new book that's being released in October of 2024. And we'll also have links to how you can pre-order that book or order it for yourself. And I hope that you'll do that. But let's get into it with Matt Popovits on this episode of the Reflection Podcast. And joining me once again in the pastor's office, Matt Popovits. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always good to chat with you, Ed.
It is a lot of fun because I learned so much from all the things that you do as a podcaster, as a pastor, a preacher, and now author. In fact, this is, I believe, your second book, isn't it, that we're going to talk about?
It is, yeah. My first book was self-published a handful of years ago. It's entitled Tough Call. It's just a little book meant to help people make big decisions. And this is indeed my second book, first book with an actual publisher.
Well, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to it. I know that we do have, as we're recording this a couple months before it actually hits the bookstores and Amazon and all the other places that people get their books.
That's
but I am looking forward to this because you did send me an advanced copy. I think it's the first 2 chapters. And I did read it. Thank you.
And thank you.
Yeah. And it was very, very good. And so that's what we're going to talk about. The book is called Junk Drawer Jesus. I had to be careful with that because it's not easy to say out loud.
It's a mouthful.
It is. And we're gonna dive into that in just a little bit. But for the sake of maybe some new listeners and viewers of the podcast, why don't you give us a little bit of a reintroduction to Matt Popovits? Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Well, I'm originally from the great state of Michigan, and that's where I met my wife of now 22 years, Lisa. We went to high school together, and we have 2 kids, Ava, who is a sophomore at Texas A&M University, and Jack, who is just starting 4th grade. And we've been doing ministry for 18 years. My first call was to far west Houston. And then I took a call doing some church planting and church revitalization in New York City. We did that for several years. And then for the last 6 years, we've been back in Houston, right in the heart of Houston, at St. Mark Lutheran Church and School, where we've been doing ministry. And alongside of that, I'm passionate about just helping people outside of the local church understand the profound truths about who Jesus is and help other people communicate them in effective ways. So I do a lot of work in trying to do that, trying to take the gospel and make it really, really accessible, not just within the church that I'm called to serve, but especially outside those walls. And that's what this book is about. But then also trying to encourage other communicators to communicate the gospel in effective, winsome ways.
It's a great resource that you have provided. You've partnered with 1517.org, which viewers will recognize. Chad Bird has been on several times now on the podcast and talking about himself and his new book. And also, I had an opportunity to talk with him about the Passover and the Lord's Supper. But you also have partnered with the Kairos Network and Matt Peoples. And Matt's been on the podcast before, and I was able to work with you and Matt on preaching that connects. And someday I want to get you both on, and we'll talk about that because that gets into the weeds a little bit for preachers, although I think a lot of people could benefit from that conversation as well. We are going to jump into talking about Junk Drawer Jesus, which will be hitting bookstores October, remind me of the exact date.
October 15th.
15th. Okay. Very good. And we want to first, I would like to know what inspired you to write this particular book. What were some of the things that God laid on your heart that I got to put this down on paper?
Well, this book flows out of, dozens and dozens of pastoral conversations over the years with people who have been tempted to walk away from their Christian faith or who have found themselves in what's now being called a deconstruction of their faith or a reevaluation of their faith. And in each of those conversations, people are really wondering if all the things they've heard about Jesus, if all the things they've been taught about what it means to follow him are really worth holding on to. And they're wrestling with this because they're tempted to say no. They really want to walk away from it. And in all those conversations, what I've tried to help them understand is what they're tempted to walk away from, what they're feeling burdened by, isn't the actual message of Jesus. It's all these other trappings, all these other things that have attached themselves to it, or that have been handed to them, or that they've laid hold of over the years that they thought was the Christian faith, that has in essence become burdensome. And so what I've done in all those conversations as a pastor is just help people assess their spiritual junk drawer, so to speak, and say, look, it is cluttered, it is, but what you want to let go of is not Jesus. What you need to let go of is all this other stuff that keeps you from seeing him and enjoying him and living in the rest and peace that comes from him. And so this book is really the culmination of all those conversations, where I offer the reader an opportunity to go on that same journey. So it's for those people who are deconstructing, reassessing, reevaluating, who feel overburdened or confused by what they've been told is this Christian faith and the life of following Jesus. And we just pull a bunch of stuff out of their own junk drawers, reassess it, and get back to the central, simple, life-changing message of God's mercy in Jesus Christ.
It is amazing. Jesus is amazing. Just a cursory glance of the four gospels, and this is an incredible individual. And we certainly don't do ourselves any favors of piling on all the different things, all the trappings and things like that.
Yeah.
And our particular tribe of Christianity, Lutheranism, we have somewhat of a history of this. 500 years ago, Martin Luther kind of tried to pull away all the trappings that had been heaped on for 1,500 years onto the story of Jesus and Jesus himself. So thank you for continuing that legacy of doing that. Let's jump into the book. Early on in the book, you mentioned junk. What you kind of give us a background of what a junk drawer is. That may be a new concept to younger viewers, Gen Z and that. But in general, you mentioned that we don't keep junk in those drawers. We actually keep something out. What exactly do people in general, I'm talking about, keep in a junk drawer?
Well, in general, people keep in a junk drawer the stuff that they don't know what to do with, but they don't really know that they can get rid of it. So it's not, we all have a junk drawer, so to speak. We all have a place we put stuff that we don't know what to do with it, but we think we might need it, so we can't throw it away. And we all have, it might be a closet, it might be a drawer. We all have that spot where it's like, well, I don't want to throw it away. I don't really know if I need it, but I might need it someday. So let me just hide it here. We all have that. And so for me, it's an actual junk drawer in my kitchen. And there's also a closet in the spare bedroom that gets piled up with things. And it's filled with stuff that I don't use on a daily basis, but I can't yet let myself part with because I'm afraid I might need it. That's really what the junk drawer is.
I have two of them here in my office.
Right. Yeah.
One is full of wires. I don't know what it is about wires.
Something about the wires. Yeah.
I got to keep them. But I also find that with papers, I've got this piece of paper with this on it. Do I really need that? And every now and then I am blessed by just chucking it in the recycle bin.
Yeah.
So as we drill down into the spiritual junk drawers, which is really what the book is about, what are some of the things that people keep in their spiritual junk drawers?
When it really is a mishmash of things, and it's different for everybody. But we all have a spiritual origin story. We all have a journey that we've been on spiritually, and from our origin story of how we came into the faith or how we got how we were made familiar with Christianity, and then the journey we've been on since then. We are natural collectors of spiritual looking, spiritual sounding things, and trying to utilize it in the spiritual framework that we have. And so it might be for you, it might be like a spiritual turn of phrase that your grandmother used to say over and over again that sounded like it came from the Bible, but it didn't really come from the Bible. But it's part of your spiritual makeup now. God helps those who help themselves, right? That's in Second Opinions, chapter 3. That everybody thinks that's a Christian idea, but it really isn't. Or it could be, some screenshot from some online influencer that really resonated with you, and you save it in a particular folder on your phone because it sounds really spiritual and encouraging. It could be just a feeling that you had way back in fifth grade when you attended church with a friend and you heard some sermon and you can't really remember exactly what was said, but it made you feel a particular way. It gave you a particular sense, and you've held on to that. You've held on to that since that day, even though you're 30, 40 years older by now. It's cultural things. It's cultural pressures and assumptions about spirituality or about how the world works that we just feel and we sense from the world that we live in. All these things come together and we hold on to them, and they form part of our spiritual makeup, and they become part of our spiritual world that we then have to navigate, and they get confused with and mixed in with the actual message of Jesus.
Why do you want us to go through these drawers then? What's at stake?
Yeah. Well, what's at stake is that these things end up, only the gospel, only the message of Christ crucified for you. Only that brings deep, lasting peace and freedom. Only that brings spiritual rest that people actually long for and need. Everything else that's not that um, adds a little bit of burden, adds a little bit of obligation to our lives, and it adds pressure to our lives. And what happens is if we never curate our spirituality, if we never go a little bit Marie Kondo, if you remember her, and do a little bit of spiritual spring cleaning, the things that weigh us down tend to pile up, and we start to sense that our entire spirituality is burdensome, or it's not useful, not helpful, not life-giving, not peace-giving. And then this temptation emerges to just walk away from all of it, including Jesus. And that's where a lot of people find themselves right now. The spirituality that they have, whether it's Christian or not, the spirituality that they have is so full of stuff that adds so much burden, confusion, and pressure that they're asking themselves an understandable question: is this worth it? Do I need it? And they're tempted to just take the whole drawer and throw it away, including the actual, message of Jesus and a life of following him.
Yeah, the phrase that comes to mind is one I remember hearing in a class in school, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
That's right.
You
Yeah.
get rid of the whole thing because part of it really, really, like you said, bogged us down or weighed us down. Jesus
Mhm.
said, come unto me, all you who are weary, and I will give you more to do. Uh, Actually, he
I
didn't
think
say
it was
that.
different. Yeah, I think it was different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
not exactly what he said. He talked about rest, and I think that's what you're getting at here.
that's
I
right.
think people are really looking for rest. They're looking for something to take the stress away and the pressure off. And Jesus is the answer to that. As Christians,
Hmm.
this is what we believe, teach, and confess to the
Hmm.
world. But it's so hard when we start to pile on all of these things. And
Hmm.
it, like you said, it does start from early on. What was it for you when you first started your Christian journey? Can you, maybe this isn't a fair question because you probably
That's
didn't know
right.
it was coming, but where were some of the older things that you knew you were going to have to, that now you had to get rid of, that were really starting to weigh you down?
Well, for me, there was from a really early age, there was an idea that my identity was tied to my performance in the eyes of others. Quite literally performance. At a young age, I started doing a lot of performing and singing and acting and things, which I loved and I'm grateful for to this day. But when you're 6 years old and you're on a stage and you are a parent is writing pieces for you to perform, you're performing them in front of students and parents, and you're getting applause. It's really enjoyable, but it also warps your understanding of the world. And so there was this quasi spiritual truth that emerged in my heart and mind at a very young age that said, I am what other people think of me. And then as I grew in faith, I took that and I I I merged it in with my growing understanding of who I was as a baptized child of God, and said, well, this is how I know the world works. This must also be how God works. And I just kind of merged the two together. The world works in such a way that if I perform and I make people smile, then I'm not only loved more, I am more. And God, since he made the world, he must work in somewhat of a similar fashion. And so even though I grew up knowing that I was loved and forgiven through the work of Jesus, there's also a part of me that said, well, God must work the same way in which the world he created works, which is do more and be more. And that, of course, in a relatively short order became incredibly burdensome, spiritually, emotionally, physically, until around about the age of like 30, I finally had to just really deal with that false spiritual idea, that false idea that had inculcated my spirituality, and really really remove it by doing some deep and difficult spiritual work of my own.
Yeah, you would be forgiven if you were getting that from God himself. I mean, the Bible does have portions of it. Be perfect as my
Right.
Father in heaven is perfect, Jesus says.
Yeah.
Do this, do that. But again, that's almost, I think we call it cherry picking. You got to take
Right.
the Bible as a whole, and you do
Yeah.
get it. And when you do, you start to realize, no, God loves you for who he made you to be, not
Hmm.
for who you think you are or who you're trying to be. I
Mm.
get that.
That's
And we
right.
see this a lot, I think, throughout different careers and professions as well. I know that with your theater and your performance background, Saturday Night Live comes to mind. I think they're coming up on what is their 50th year.
Yeah, they are.
But why so many casts? Why do they have to? Why is there a lot of turnover in that? And I think a lot of it is they have to up themselves every
That's right.
time, every week. They got to come up with something more, something
That's
bigger,
right.
something better. And that you see that a
Mhm.
lot in the performance industry as well. Is what have you done for me lately? I've got to do something more. But the healthy performers are ones that realize, no, that's not quite, you know. And so it works with the Christian faith as well.
Absolutely. And that's really what we talk about in the second chapter of the book. So the first thing in the book, as you read it, that you'll see that we pull out of the junk drawer is a scale.
Hmm.
And not like a bathroom scale, but like a little scale that you might use in the kitchen to weigh out the precise amount, if you're a coffee snob, the precise amount of beans to make your pour over coffee, which I used to do, but it became too much of a grind. And so uh, you got that,
Yeah,
Ed.
I figured it.
So the first thing we pull out is a little scale, a unit of measurement. And what that represents is what I think is a foundational misunderstanding of Christian spirituality that many of us have, which is, and even those of us who know better struggle to shake, which is the idea that I am the sum total of my good works in the eyes of God and the eyes of the world. And even though those of us who've grown up in the church, we know that that's not true. We functionally live so much of our lives as if it's true. We are always trying to balance some kind of cosmic scale and say, well, as long as my good outweighs my bad, then I am good. As long as my good outweighs my bad, then I am good. And that is just not how God works. Does God want us to be good? Yes. Anywhere does he tell us that we can actually be good enough to somehow sway things in our favor? No. But if you buy into that at all, it becomes this soul killing, um, peace robbing notion that just haunts you. And so so we go right at it in chapter 2 after we set up the junk drawer, go right after this idea of like you cannot balance the scales in your favor. I know everything in the world is telling you that you can, but you have to let go of that idea. Get that out of your junk drawer. Get that out of your life. You cannot balance the scales in your favor. And that is a fundamental truth to return to so that you can actually have some peace and joy in your life of faith. You cannot balance things in your favor. You don't have to. Jesus has done it all.
On a previous episode of the podcast, I talked with a former Muslim.
Yeah.
He was a militia, part of a Muslim militia as a child, and now he's a Christian that helps other Muslims come to Jesus. And so that cosmic scale that you are talking
Hmm.
about is it's fundamental to the Islamic faith. That
Yeah.
at the end they're going to weigh up what you did versus that was good versus what was bad. And I think that
Hmm.
I think that that's, like you said, that's common to the world, that
Well, that I mean, but that's and it's common to the it's so understandably a part of everyone's spiritual framework
Mhm.
because that is apart from faith in Christ and apart from the kingdom of God, that's actually how 99% of things work. And that's why it's so hard for us to jettison. I mean, you're if the good doesn't outweigh the bad at my workplace, they fire me, right? If the good doesn't outweigh the bad on the ball field, I don't make the team. If the good doesn't outweigh the bad with me and my spouse, we're sitting in counseling. Like this is how the world works. And so it's understandable that so many go, well, this is how God must work too, but it's not. It's in fact the exact opposite, which is so hard for us. It takes an entire lifetime, and we never really fully get there, I think, to really understand that it totally upside down. It is purely by mercy and grace through Jesus Christ.
It's something outside of us, and
Yeah.
it's going to have to. We talk about faith and grace, and we can't do it on our own. I mean that it's a truth. It is the truth that
Yeah.
it is God that does it for us, but it's so hard because I want to do something. I have to do something. And of course, God did make us to do things. I mean, He
Mhm.
put Adam and Eve in the garden to work it. I want you to do
That's right.
something.
Hmm.
But this isn't it. This
That's right.
God, I'm going to take care of this so that you can do all the rest.
Hmm.
So, like you said, you mentioned that it takes a lifetime of this. So it's no wonder that people get frustrated.
That's
But
right.
who, who exactly should be reading this book?
Yeah, great question.
Who's your audience?
I think if anyone is listening right now, and when they start to think of religion, Jesus, going to church on Sunday, a sense of dread or heaviness washes over them, then this is for you. Because what that means is that your spiritual life has become more burden than blessing. It's become more obligation than opportunity for joy. It's become more of a have to than a get to. It means that there is too much clutter and not enough Christ. So that's who this book is for. If when you think of religion, spirituality, Jesus, going to church, you just get, as the kids would say, the ick, then this is for you because that means that it's time to do some spiritual spring cleaning.
So, what are they going to get out of this book other than, I mean, we've talked about the first two
Yeah.
chapters. What are some of the other items that you're going to explore in this book?
Yeah. So actually, what I could do is just kind of walk through all
Sure.
the items in the junk drawer. So in the first chapter, we set up that metaphor of the spiritual junk drawer, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then we talk about the cosmic scale, which we just mentioned, this idea that we have to balance things in our favor in order to be right with God. But then we stay in kind of the realm of measurement. And in chapter 3, we talk about this idea, this temptation that we have once we're in faith to measure our progress in the faith. So if the scale is about making things right with God, the next item that we look at, which is a ruler, is about measuring how much of God we actually have, how close we are to God. It's this temptation to measure, rank, and assess our spirituality or our sanctification, as really church people might say. Then we switch to something that many people confuse with their spirituality, and certainly I have, even as a pastor. And we switch to talking about vocation or talking about work and how work becomes a means of self-salvation for many of us. Performing in the public sphere, crushing it vocationally becomes a means of propping up our identity and our self-worth, and it becomes a false god in that sense. As we talk about how the idea of our work as a savior gets in the way of us actually enjoying Jesus as savior. And the item in the junk drawer there is an ID badge that we all have to kind of scan to get into the building. And then we talk about hearing from God. Every one of us wants to hear God's voice. We want to get direction from Him, and yet there are a lot of wrong, backward, false assumptions that we carry with us about how God actually speaks. And so we talk about how God actually does speak to us, and through His Word, rather than through all these other things that we put pressure on ourselves to try and hear God, to experience God. And then we talk about pietism, which is a fancy church word for uh, uh, trying to be someone who follows all the rules in order to curry favor with God. We talk about the distinction between pietism and party animals, and we talk about a whistle in that portion of the book. There's the idea that somehow we get more of God, or we are more holy if we follow all these rules. And for some people who grew up in a really strict religious background, this chapter will resonate with them. Then we talk about the shallowness of happiness, which is the idea that gets into many people's theological junk drawers of God just wants me to be happy. In the words of the great theologian Sheryl Crow, if it makes me happy, it can't be that bad. And so we talk about that notion of, does God want you to be happy? And we contrast happiness versus holiness, and which is really primary, and how do we get there? And then the last item in the junk drawer is a lucky rabbit's foot keychain. And we talk about idolatry, and how at the bottom of all of this stuff that gets in the way is this impulse and urge we have to worship stuff that is created by God, but is not God himself. And then we finish the book out by talking about what it means, once you've rummaged through all these things, to continually curate your spirituality so that the focus remains on Christ.
So I'm going to ask a question that's going to follow up on all of that. But first, I want to get kind of look at you talked a little bit about it, your ministry. What were some of the aspects of your ministry? How did that inform, or how did that inspire these particular things in the junk drawer that you were pulling out? Because basically, it's a question of what is it that you actually do in your ministry, the different aspects of it.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of this, to be honest, is inspired by the time that I spent doing ministry in New York City. I was there for just over 6 years doing ministry in Queens and then in Midtown Manhattan, talking to a lot of young professionals, a lot of people kind of on the fringes of faith, or skeptical about the faith, or people who wanted to be a part of the church but are really, really burned out by evangelical Christianity. And so a lot of the stuff that we ultimately tackle in the book is inspired by those conversations. So for example, work is a huge piece of identity for everybody, but especially for young New Yorkers. I mean, they move there for their careers, and so much of work becomes like an existential crisis for them, right? I am what I do. Did I get the part after the audition? Am I making enough money to warrant all the hours I'm spending down on Wall Street? And so that inspired that. And then when you talk about things like God wants me to be happy, there is everywhere, but especially there, this notion, this kind of utilitarian approach to spirituality, which says, look, that which makes me and the greatest number of people happy must be of God and must be good. And there's a real shallowness and ultimately emptiness at the end of that. And so really it comes out of conversations in my ministry with people who are trying to find their way with Jesus, make sense of their faith, make it work with their life. And in particular, out of that season of being in New York and working with so many fascinating young people.
I kind of thought that was going to be the answer, because I wanted that to come out, is that especially for the pastors that may be watching this or listening to this, that is what the ministry is about. It's about being with people. It's about your relationships with your people. It's not just about sitting up in the pulpit or up on the stage preaching, although that is a big part of what we do.
Yeah, that's right.
But a lot of that is informed by the day-to-day interactions that we have with people. Let's go a little bit then into the minutia of writing for those of you who are inspired or want to be a writer. The writing process that you go through personally, and how it shaped this particular book.
So for me, I wrote this book over the course of about 7 months. So I'd been gathering up a bunch of notes and gathering up a bunch of thoughts for months and months before that. But really, the actual writing took between about 7 months. And really what it boils down to for me is the process in broad strokes is really get a good handle on the big idea of the whole book. Make sure that that's really clear and that it addresses a felt need for the hearer. Understand clearly who the audience is, understand what the problem is that we're going to try and solve with the book, and then outline that book. So I just outlined, the 9 chapters or so that are in the book. And then really just one by one, early mornings before heading into the office, stealing time here and there, just cranking out anywhere from 500 to 1,000, 1,500 words a day, most days of the week for about 6.5 months or so. And it's just it's really just about being disciplined on a daily basis and not getting too caught up in how much you write each day, but that you write something each day. You might throw away what you write that day, but just making sure that whether it's 500 or 1,500 words, you get something down each and every day, and little by little, it all comes together. And then the next piece is having some really great editors to run things by. So I was really blessed in this book. I think the book is really strong, not so much because of my writing, but because of the editing. Fantastic people who read the book and said, "This is good. This doesn't make sense. This is redundant. This is poorly worded." Or who challenged me to go deeper, or who challenged an assumption here or there that maybe lacked integrity. And so I had 3 different people serve as editors on this book, reading and testing all the content, and then doing rewrites as a result of that. And so that's really, I think, what makes a book go from being something that's written to something that's able to be read and enjoyed by as many people as possible. But really what it comes, like the actual process of writing itself, begins with clarity on who you're writing it for and the problem that you're trying to solve. And then day by day, just making sure you do a little bit each day. So for me, that meant, I mentioned 500 and 1,500. It meant my goal was to write no less than 500 words, no more than 1,500 words a day. And so if I had that goal in front of me, then I felt good about whatever I was able to put together each day.
The person who's reading this now, they bought into it. They're going to empty their junk drawer.
Yeah.
What do you tell them, or how do you help them if they're putting stuff back in the drawer, or they're filling it again? This is not I'm assuming this is not a one-time process, that it's going to be an ongoing thing. But then they put stuff back in. They empty out, they put back in. What do you tell them?
I tell them the goal is not to get to a place of spiritual minimalism and stay there, because that becomes a burden in and of itself. The part of the goal of the book is to understand that you have the freedom to and the invitation to look at all the spiritual assumptions that you carry, look at the things that you believe, and sort through them and get back to the core message of Christ. That you have that freedom. It doesn't make you bad because you're feeling burdened and because your spirituality is confusing or frustrating. It doesn't make you bad. It just means that you probably need to take a look at it, and that it's okay to do that. But it's a lifelong thing. Martin Luther, the great reformer, his first of the 95 Theses says that the Lord wills that the entire life of a believer be a life of repentance. And what he means by that is not that the entire life of a believer should be one where you are in constant grief over your sin. What he's saying there is, well, that's certainly a part of it when we do sin. What he's saying there is that the entire life of a believer is meant to be a life of constantly returning to Christ. Constantly returning to Christ. When you've wandered away, when you've gotten confused, when things have gotten cluttered, returning to Christ. And so my word to the person who's saying, yeah, I'm gonna sort through these things, get back to the central message of who Jesus is my word to them is, welcome to an ongoing journey of doing what Martin Luther invited us to do, which is continually, perpetually crawl back to Christ. To realize when there's clutter, push it away and crawl back to Christ. Christ crucified for me. That's the end, that's the beginning, that's the middle.
I'm tempted, or the phrase that came to mind was that so many people are tempted to look at all of this as checking off a to-do list. Well, I've
Sure.
done that, done that,
Yeah.
done that, and if your life is a to-do list, you don't have much of a life, and that's I would think that people would
Yeah.
agree with that. If you're married, if your marriage is a to-do list, what happens when you finish the to-do list? But
That's right.
it's a relationship. As you said,
Yeah.
Luther wants us to come back, and God wants us to come back to him
That's right.
instantly. I would assume that if we're talking about God, then there are no limits to that. We can fall away and we can come back. We can crawl back as many times as it takes. Correct? Am I right in that?
Yeah. Yes, you are. And that's, I mean, that's how all relationships are meant to work. It's, relationships, God has designed relationships in such a way that we get distracted by all the stuff that's going around us in life, and then we're able to come back home to the people and the places who love us no matter what, right? And I'm not bad because I've been at work and away and distracted and got caught up in the idea that closing the sale, that crushing it in the office was the most important thing. That's what happens when you go to work. But what I get to do is come back home to my wife. What I get to do is come back home to my kids and find my rest there and find that I'm accepted there and enjoy that. That's how relationships work. They call us back to who and what matters most in the midst of all these distractions. And over the course of your life, that's what your marriage is, for example. It's coming back home to your husband, coming back home to your wife over and over and over again and discovering that they love you anyway. That's what our relationship with Jesus is. We go through life, we get distracted, we get pulled away, we make mistakes, and then each and every day we come back home. We come back home to Christ. We come back home to Christ. I'm loved not because of what I've done or not or failed to do today. I'm loved because Jesus Christ has lived and died and risen for me. It's each and every day a chance to come back home to God through Jesus Christ. That's the relationship. And that's what this book is about. It's inviting you into a life where you don't reject Jesus because of the clutter. You get when you see the clutter, you make your way back to Jesus, and you say, "Thank you that none of this other stuff matters. It's just you and who and what you've done for me."
One of the pictures that was coming into my mind was the Pilgrim's Progress. At the beginning of the story, the
Mm,
main character, Christian, is carrying a burden. He's got
yeah.
this huge burden on his back, and eventually he ends up at a cross, and the burden falls off and rolls down into a tomb, never to be
Ah,
seen
that's right.
again. That
Hmm.
that Jesus is inviting us to empty the junk drawer, to unburden ourselves, to take all of that away. And then I'm reminded of a preacher I heard years ago, how every time we come to worship, every time we come to the cross, to hear Jesus, we bring a bag of all of our stuff, that those sins and all the garbage that we accumulated, and we empty it at the cross. Um,
Hmm.
and Jesus, and we're warned, I think, don't put it back in the bag.
Right.
Don't put it at the cross and then pick it up again and walk away.
Hmm.
You're going to fill that bag again.
Yeah.
You don't
Yeah.
need to fill it with the stuff that he's taking away now, and then come back again. Um,
Hmm.
the
That's
last
right.
picture that came to mind as you were talking about that was our holidays. For
Mm.
me, the Thanksgiving holidays, the Christmas holidays is a time to come home again to what's
Hmm.
really, really important. And it isn't about the meal or the presents. It's about the family that gathers together, the friends that
Hmm.
come together. And Jesus is should be at the center of all
Hmm.
that for the Christian, especially.
That's
So
right.
I want to prevail upon you a little bit and see if you have a favorite section, or can share with us, maybe read a little bit about this. And I will tell you that Chad Bird did this with his book, and he did it. He knocked
Yeah.
it out of the park. So I don't want to scare you, anybody, but I do want to see if there's something you can share with us from the book.
Of course. Well, it's man, this is a trite but true saying. Trying to find a favorite section of the book is like asking me which one of my kids is my favorite. Um, because it's all special to me in its own way. But let me see. Let me get to there's a particular section here. Um, it's in the chapter about the shallowness of happiness. And it's a story I tell towards the end about throwing a birthday party for my kids. And it was my daughter's 10th birthday and my son's first birthday. And we went all out. And let me just turn to the right page here in the book. Hold on. It's a long book, not too long, but it's a long book. Here we go. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. This is from The Shallowness of Happiness. My two children share the same birthday month. One year, to save on cost and to make it easier for the friends and family who'd want to celebrate, we combined their respective celebrations into one big party. I soon discovered that coming up with a theme that would please two very different children, separated in age by 9 years, would not be easy. My effort to bring their parties together under a theme of things that their father loves, such as 80s pop culture, obscure and out-of-print theology books, and fine-tasting yet affordable Scotch whiskey, proved neither successful nor appropriate. We went with circus. Not all that original, but nonetheless a hit. The petting zoo put it over the top. Truth be told, their mother and I were determined to plan a party that our kids would truly love. We wanted to make a memory. For us, it's part of being a good parent. It's also what birthday parties are for, feeling like the center of the universe and getting what you wish for. Plus, if you have to share it with a sibling, it might as well be worth it. Cue the petting zoo, pony rides, and the all-you-can-eat candy buffet. We went all out. Although a whiskey-themed party would have been fun. Just saying. Day-to-day parenting, however, is different from party planning. Every other day, my concern as a parent is not what my kids are wishing for, but who my children are becoming. I'm less concerned with making a memory and more focused on making them into a certain kind of human being. These children have been entrusted to us not to indulge their desires, but to mold them into people who bring honor to our family name, glory to our God, and who add beauty to this difficult world. We want them to grow up and to someday move out of our home, holding an unshakable peace, paired with an ever-present joy. And we won't get there through parties alone. We'd be negligent as parents. We have higher hopes for them than a surface-level happiness. And God, your Father, has greater hopes for you, too.
The book is Junk Drawer Jesus. And how can people pick up this book?
Well, you can get it really anywhere books are sold. So you can, of course, you can pre-order it right now. It comes out October 15th, but it's available for pre-order right now at Amazon.com, as well as 1517.org/shop. You can go to Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all those places, and you can order the book. It's available in paperback, hardcover, audiobook, Kindle, all those things. And so you can get it in any format, really at any place. And for the pastors and church leaders who are listening, 1517 does offer a bulk discount, as well as some additional resources for churches that want to use this church-wide. So, for example, there's a sermon series that pairs with this book, as well as some small group materials, all available for free over at 1517.org. And so you can buy a bunch of copies for your small groups, for your church, and you can pair it with a sermon series, and also have some discussion questions ready to go for them.
Perfect. I'm glad to hear that. I was going to ask if somehow we can turn this into a message series in our churches. So I'm glad to hear that.
Done. I got you, Ed.
I'm glad. What would you recommend that's out there maybe now that people can pick up after they read Junk Drawer Jesus?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I don't know if you've had Dave Zahl on your podcast yet,
Not
but
yet.
David Zahl, wonderful theologian, cultural commentator. He runs Mockingbird Ministries, and he has a fabulous book. It's a couple years old now, but it's a fabulous book. And it's kind of in the same vein as this book in the sense that it talks about all the little false religions that we operate with in this modern world. And the book is called Seculosity. Seculosity. And it is fabulous. And Dave Zahl is the kind of writer I want to be when I grow up.
Got it. Again, as usual, and per the way we do things here at the Reflection Podcast, all of these links will be in the show notes that you can get a hold of Matt and pre-order the book and go to 1517.org. I have no affiliation with 1517.org, but I am one of their biggest fans. So I try to promote them as much as possible because I've been blessed by all the work that you and they have done. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining me once again on the Reflection Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ed. I look forward to the next time.
Thanks for joining me today on the Reflection Podcast. And my thanks again to Matt for joining me, taking time out of his busy schedule. Matt has an incredible story to tell and tells it in an incredible way. Junk Drawer Jesus is his new book, and there are links in our description here that you can click on to pre-order or order your book, depending on when you're watching this episode. I hope that you will share this episode, rate it, and leave a positive comment. That will help more and more people get to this episode and the entire podcast. That is also the conclusion of season 3 of the Reflection Podcast. I'm so glad to all my guests, and thank you to all of my guests over the last 10 episodes that have joined me today. There will be 2 special episodes coming up a little bit later on this year, one about the election and one about Thanksgiving. And then season 4 will premiere in January is the plan right now of 2025. And I've got a whole lineup of new and returning guests that will be joining me for season 4. Reflection is a production of St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. You can go to our website to find out more at stmatts.net, stmatts.net. And all our worship services are streamed live as they happen, as well as then there are recordings of them that you can watch at any time. Many of our Bible studies are also streamed live on YouTube and Facebook and wherever you get your streaming services, stuff like that. If you are in the Hawthorne Woods area, this is about 45 minutes northwest of Chicago. We're in the northeastern Illinois, and we're only about a half-hour's drive from O'Hare Airport, so you can come out and join us. There are directions on our website and how you can connect with us as well. That's it for this season of the Reflection Podcast. I'm Ed Blonsky. Again, thank you for sharing and commenting and rating the show, and I pray that you will be richly blessed. And join me again next time for the Reflection Podcast.